Alzheimer's should be a rare disease.
We now understand that Alzheimer's is a preventable disease in the first place.
You are not stuck with the brain you have. You can make your brain better.
Hello, I'm Peggy Sarlin, and today I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I am so excited to speak with Dr. Joseph MAROON, a world-renowned neurosurgeon. And Dr. MAROON is the first surgeon I've spoken to in this series, so he really brings us new perspectives on brain health. He is the medical director of World Wrestling Entertainment and also of the Pittsburgh Steelers, so he knows about head injuries and how to heal them. Dr. MAROON is an Ironman athlete. He's an expert in nutrition, which is not typical of surgeons at all. And he has deep insight into burnout, into extreme stress, because he's lived it. So I really think you're going to find a lot of practical wisdom in what Dr. MAROON has to tell us. So welcome, Dr. MAROON.
Thank you so much, Peggy. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation and bringing these messages to your audience.
So, Doctor, I think a lot of people who are watching us may be caregivers to people with Alzheimer's or with some other serious problem. And we have talked a lot in this series about what goes on in the brain of people with dementia. But what we haven't talked about is what goes on in the brain of their caregiver, of somebody who's living with relentless stress day after day, and they need help too. So tell us about the caregivers and their stress load.
Peggy, it's an absolutely huge problem when you think about the number of patients with dementia, with traumatic brain injuries, with families of kids who have opioid problems, of single mothers and wherever they live. And as you said, the overwhelming intense stress. So we have to ask ourselves, what does stress do to the body and to the brain? And we know these people feel overwhelmed, overworked, overcommitted, and clearly overstressed. And when that happens, the body, in its protective mode, releases a hormone called cortisol, which is initially protective, but when elevated in a chronic way, has very negative effects on the body and also the brain. In fact, it literally destroys brain cells, particularly in that area of the brain that subserves memory. So people say, I can't remember this, I can't remember that, when they're under chronic stress. And it's because they're actually damaging their brain as well as their blood vessels, their heart, and other parts of the body.
So cortisol is kind of a key figure in this drama that we're going to discuss, the drama of stress. And it's something that we need. It's a hormone, it's a neurotransmitter.
It's a hormone that's protective to the body. It's part of the fight or flight mechanism that evolutionarily we've been imbued with for hundreds of thousands of years. So it's cortisol, and it's also adrenaline or epinephrine that enables us to avoid danger, to get out of difficult situations quickly. But when the danger is over, we go back to a normal homeostatic way, you might say. But when it's chronically elevated, as you said, in the caregivers or individuals who are caring for a spouse that is becoming progressively more incapacitated, what happens is this hormone continues, as other hormones continue to be elevated, and it contributes to depression, to futility, to feeling overwhelmed, and then a downward spiral that really is hard to stop unless we do very specific things that I discuss in my book, Square One, A Simple Guide to a Balanced Life, in which I outline the measures that can be taken by anyone in extreme stress conditions to hopefully reverse the process.
Well, you're telling us something very important and very scary, which is that if we're under extreme stress for a long period of time, our brain is continually besieged by cortisol. And it's continuously, cortisol is killing the brain cells. Our brains are being murdered.
Overstimulation will result in the death of brain cells, particularly in an area of the brain, in the temporal area here, in an area called the hippocampus, which subserves memory.
And our audience who's interested in Alzheimer's knows, many of them, that the hippocampus is where Alzheimer's begins.
Precisely. The first thing that happens is I can't remember my keys, I can't remember going to the store, and then emotional disorders also subsequently come where there's significant mood changes, impulsivity, anger, difficulty to control emotions and activities. And all of this obviously is a function of dysfunctional brain workings.
So we have this kind of horrible irony going on where you may be a caregiver to somebody with Alzheimer's, and the stress of that situation is flooding your brain with cortisol, which is precisely attacking the hippocampus, the area that is setting you up to potentially get Alzheimer's.
Precisely. That's exactly what happens in the story. So that those who are committed to helping their spouse, their child, their loved one, unless it's in a way where they are aware of the overcommitment that it sometimes requires and takes very specific steps to obviate that stress, it can really become even more disruptive.
Well, we're going to talk about how to obviate that stress, as you say. But first, let's also just look at some other professions or situations that you mentioned, caring for a child. What are some other, you and I have spoken about the fact that doctors are prone to extreme stress.
This is a horrible problem in physicians. Recently, the Mayo Clinic published a study in which they looked at several thousand physicians and concluded that several years ago, the incidence of burnout was 30 or 40%. It's now up to 49%. And in my profession, neurosurgery, it's 57%.
A majority
So the majority of neurosurgeons are under significant stress to the point where they have one of the main determinations of burnout. Number one, it's overwhelmed. The mental exhaustion, where they feel they simply have a difficult time coping. The second is depersonalization, meaning they lose contact emotionally with their family, their colleagues, even their patients. They may become irritable, cynical, sarcastic. It's a symptom of the depersonalization. And the third is they don't feel fulfilled in their profession, in their work. What's it all about, Alfie? Why am I doing this? I'm killing myself for this. So 50% of physicians have one of these symptoms now. And the other problem in caregivers, as well as physicians and nurses and other healthcare providers, is that of suicide. Suicide ideation. 400 physicians committed suicide last year.
Oh, that's horrible.
And in medical students, there was a recent paper in the Journal of the American Medical Association where they looked at burnout in medical students. And 7 to 10% of medical students at some point have suicidal ideation. In other words, it enters their mind, and it's a consideration. So the consequences of not dealing with this in a proper way are horrendous.
Well, you differentiated stress from burnout. There's stress, and I think we all know, everybody's experienced stress. But when it sustains over a period of time, it can devolve into burnout. And that seemed to, the way you described it, that seemed to entail personality change. Is that the key factor?
Well, I think you're touching on an incredibly important point. There's good stress and there's bad stress. Distress, D-I-S, and eustress, EU stress. And if you draw a chart And you have a parabolic curve where the curve goes up and it gets to a point and then it goes down. And you have good stress on this side. And once you get over a threshold, it's bad stress. So as you mentioned, I do triathlons, and I've been doing these for many years. And any athlete knows that unless you stress your body, you don't get better. You don't get stronger. You don't get faster.
Right.
So stress is good. Stress is very good as long as it's controlled. When it gets into distress, in other words, when it becomes overwhelming, then it takes a very serious toll depending on the severity of the stress.
Well, I think one thing that differentiates stress from burnout is when you are constantly in a position that is out of your control. So let's go back to the caregiver.
Yes.
Crisis after crisis after crisis for which you may not have the resources, the energy, the time, the money, the knowledge. And things are happening that you can control. And that is extraordinarily dangerous, I suppose, long term, to be carrying that kind of a load.
It's very dangerous, and unfortunately, it's epidemic in our society and in our country today. When you look, you go into the various areas of Pittsburgh, and you see that 60 to 70% of the children are born out of wedlock to single mothers. So it begins very early in terms
the
of
stress of the mother.
How the stress of the mother actually gets conveyed intra-utero in the womb to the brain of the child. We know that, we have a terrible situation with crack babies, born in McGee Women's Hospital here at the University of Pittsburgh. And they're mothers who abuse their bodies during pregnancy with cocaine, with various types of drugs, even with marijuana, can have deleterious long-term effects on the baby's brains, inclinations, synaptic connections, and the neuroplasticity or growth of the baby's brain. So these kids come out in withdrawal of the wound. So it starts very early in terms of, we talked about resilience. We both have been very fortunate in our lives to have gone through cataclysmic types of stresses, and somehow we've been able to survive that and come out the other side better off. And again, that's the story I tell in my book, Square One, that there are ways of coping with stress that are very healthy without drugs, without pharmaceutical drugs,
Right.
without pharmaceutical drugs. So
let's start giving help to people who are watching and who are coping with stress. And the first thing I want to ask you is we're going to get into your book, which is a whole philosophy. But before we get into something more elaborate, let's start with something simple. After people watch this, can they then go to the store and buy some supplements that are going to help them fortify their body and build their resilience in a time of extreme stress?
Well, supplements are one part of the whole picture,
yes,
as you well know.
Yes.
We talk about epigenetics, or the epigenetic factors, those factors that tell our genes whether to make good proteins or bad proteins, inflammation in our body or anti-inflammation. So if we eat an inappropriate diet with a lot of sugar and soft drinks and trans fatty acids on our French fries and hormone-infused beef, it's going to tell our genes to make inflammatory agents, and inflammation is the common genesis of Alzheimer's, of stroke, of myocardial infarction or heart attacks, and damage to our joints and endothelium. If we eat a Mediterranean diet, take the right supplements that I will get to, exercise, control their environmental toxins, too much alcohol, smoking, and control stress, your body makes anti-inflammatory agents that leads to a healthy heart, a healthy brain, and healthy joints. So the supplements, yes, there are certain supplements that I take every day. The first is omega-3 fatty acids, fish oil, I take a product, Omax 3, that is a very high concentration of EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, versus DHA, which has a very high anti-inflammatory component, because I work out a lot and I stress my body a lot. I take another product called nicotinamide riboside, made by a company, Chromadex, and this product is essential for mitochondrial support. And one of the leading theories of aging, why we look and get older, and why we develop the various diseases that you're focusing upon in this season, is because of the malfunction of mitochondria. Mitochondria are little organelles in each cell of our body that convert glucose or sugar and oxygen into ATP. ATP is the energy molecule that drives everything we do, every cell in terms of its energy. NAD is a precursor to, it's essential in the making of in our cells of ATP. Nicotinamide riboside helps in making NDA, which is a precursor of ATP. So I take this every day, and I feel it helps with energy. It helps with metabolism of fat, trans fatty acids, or fat in our liver, and also it's neuroprotective. Vitamin D3, I think, is an essential vitamin in terms of neuroprotection, as well as endothelial protection. The endothelium is the lining of our blood vessels. We need to take care of the lining of our blood vessels because it leads to heart disease and also strokes. Right. So vitamin D3 is an essential vitamin, and also magnesium is involved in 300 different chemical reactions in our body, and particularly if you work out hard or sweat a lot, magnesium gets depleted, and it's essential for, again, cellular support. So these are some of the things that I think are really important to add when you're under stress. Another is resveratrol. Resveratrol is a natural product found in red wine and also in grapes. I don't want you to take too much red wine, but 1 glass for women, 2 glasses for men are thought to have significant healthy benefits, just like dark chocolate. So you can drink a little wine and a little dark chocolate.
That sounds good.
And help yourself. And
I'm less stressed already just thinking about it.
You're helping yourself. But it's another antioxidant, neuroprotective agent that is in the supplement range that I think that is important, as well as probiotics. In terms of our microbiome, the health of our gut is a reflection of about 70% of the immunity that we develop comes from our intestinal tract and the bacteria in our gut. So gut health is extremely important to brain health. There's a clear-cut gut-brain reaction, as you well know.
People who are watching this, who are living very stressful lives right now, the first thing they've learned is that their brains are being affected by the stress. And now they've learned, and their brains are being affected directly on the hippocampus, and they're becoming vulnerable to that kind of decay, Alzheimer's, dementia. And their brains are probably getting inflamed as well. So once they know this, they can understand, I have to start taking action to protect myself. And something I can do that's simple, I can get up just like Dr. Maroon does. I can get up in the morning, I can take omega-3. If they're vegetarians and they don't want to take fish oil, can they take krill oil instead?
Krill oil is a very good supplement.
Okay,
yes.
So they need to take their omega-3s. They need to take the one I can't remember because it's a long, complicated
nicotinamide riboside, NR.
NR is easier. I can remember
NR made by Chromadex, a company in California.
So we've got our fish oil, our NR, resveratrol, vitamin D3. You may mention probiotic to keep that healthy gut-brain connection, magnesium, which you burn up during stress. So we've given people something practical. You can go to the store and you can start taking these today and start feeling better?
Well, I don't want to mislead our audience, Peggy, in the sense that it's not all in a pill. It's excellent. As I said, it's multifactorial. It's one of the things that's, I think, important to do because our diets are not as healthy as they should be, generally in the United States. But the most important thing is caregivers that I've seen, patients who have had terrible problems, strokes and other things, brain tumors, is depression. So it's the futility of not being able to do what they want to do to help the individual that leads to depression. So if you go to your doctor, what's the first thing the doctor gives you for depression?
An antidepressant.
Precisely. And then if you can't sleep, what does he give you?
A sleeping pill.
Exactly. And if you're too anxious, what does he give you?
What's that, Xanax?
And you see,
Okay.
it gives you an anti. So what happens is you come home with 3 different prescriptions. Mm-hmm. So let me rhetorically ask you, what is the most effective antidepressant? The most effective?
I happen to know.
It's exercise.
Yes.
It's physical aerobic activity. Mm-hmm. And studies have been done in patients who have been depressed. And they've put them on one group on antidepressants and anxiolytics, and the other group they put in a structured exercise program 3 to 5 times a week. The patients who have been on the exercise program invariably improve and don't need the drugs. So the first thing a caregiver can do is get out and walk around the block once, and then twice, and then 3 times, and try to get 8,000 to 10,000 steps in a day that we talk about now with our Fitbits and our pedometers. But the reason, and you know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask the audience, why does exercise work as an antidepressant? Why? What's it do to the brain?
Tell us.
And it does several things. Number one, it increases a molecule in our brain called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. Our brain releases this molecule, and it does 3 things. It actually creates new brain cells. So the brain cells that we lose from the stress, we can replace with exercise. Number 2, it increases the connections between brain cells that are called synapses. So it increases the connections wherein memory is encoded, and it aids our memory. And also, it enhances what's called neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to regenerate and to reheal itself, to make new tracks through the brains that are destroyed by stress. So those are 3 things that just BDNF does. So when I get on my bike this afternoon and I ride up the hill that we drove down to get here, I'm thinking, gosh, I'm getting my BDNF higher every time I stress myself. But it does other things with the neurotransmitters, which are the chemicals between the connections of our brain. If your audience can follow this, let me just tell you a little bit about the complexity of the brain. We have over 100 billion neurons or transistors or cells in our brain, our cortex. Cortex means outer layer. Each of those cells has up to thousands of connections. So the synapses, the connections, are in the numbers of trillions. So when we interrupt these connections, malfunction occurs in different organ systems. We can enhance these. Now, at each of these synaptic connections is a chemical that tells the next neuron what to do. These are called neurotransmitters. Dopamine, the feel-good hormone that we get also from exercise and also gets released by narcotics, is why you get addicted to it. These receptors crave more of the feeling good of dopamine. Serotonin, an antidepressant molecule, and also anandamide. Very few people have heard about anandamide. Anandamide is the brain's own marijuana if I might say. Why does marijuana give people euphoria, a high? It does it because there are receptors in the brain called the endocannabinoid. You've heard of cannabis? Endocannabinoid receptors.
Right.
Endo meaning within our own brain. They're within us, endogenous. Marijuana gives us a high, a good feeling, because it attaches to these endocannabinoid receptors. However, God, in His great glory, made us with our own endogenous or inherent marijuana. Anandamide is what it's called. It comes from the Indian transcript word meaning bliss. So when we exercise and we get this good feeling, we're also releasing anandamide into our receptors. This is all natural. And what they found that how do antidepressants work in the brain? They're now discovering that it's releasing BDNF.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really.
Oh.
So wouldn't you rather take a walk around the block or up the hill or through the woods or take a swim in a lake than take antidepressants that cost you thousands of dollars a year, have side effects, decrease your libido, and really are effective in maybe 50% of the people?
What you're saying is so profound because we're programmed to go to the doctor, get a pill. This makes me better. It's something extrinsic. It's something that we take outside of ourselves to cure what's in us. And you're telling us is that we're built to actually create all these positive biochemical interactions just through exercise.
Peggy, think about 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, when we were on the savannah in Africa. And we had to survive stress every day. The saber-toothed tiger jumping out of the woods, or starving and not famine, feast and famine. So our bodies, to survive, our bodies have learned over hundreds of thousands of years how to handle stress. We need to encourage it in today's modern day, kind of to reach back to those periods where we work instead of chasing and hunting our food, but to get physical exercise, either that or through hard work. We also need to watch our diet. I mean, 60% of the people in the United States are obese or overweight.
60%.
Yeah. The United States has the highest GDP in the world. Our length of survival, we were in terms of age, how many centenarians we have, we're 31st.
Well, that's quite a discrepancy.
So it doesn't matter how much money we're making or the goods we're producing. Our lifestyle is deteriorating in terms of what we put in as fuel into our body. As, again, going back, I wasn't always a triathlete, and this is what I discuss in my book. I mean, I burned out myself in my early 40s. I was doing brain surgery one day, and the next week I was literally, I had to quit my job, and I was working in a truck stop, filling up 18-wheelers and flipping burgers, because I burned out. My life was all work. I lost my family. I lost my father. I ended up for a year dropping out of neurosurgery. I could not function. I could do no more than fill up an 18-wheeler truck with diesel fuel. So the thing is that it's not futile. And I guess the message is, don't give up hope. There are ways, if we do it the right way, if we attend to our bodies, we attend to our minds with spirituality, meditation, prayer, by reducing stress, and we eliminate the toxic factors in our diet, our air, our water as much as we can, there is hope for the caregiver. There is hope for those individuals who are burnt out. I've given several talks at different university hospitals. I'm speaking at Harvard next week to the medical students there about burnout. It's a terrible problem in the medical profession, from the medical student to the residents, and we're initiating a program at the University of Pittsburgh in burnout, in wellness, actually. It's a wellness program that incorporates those 4 factors for the residents so that they're aware of it. We're providing a gym for them. We're providing knowledge and healthy diet and how to handle stress better, and also how to avoid the things that will affect your immune system. So it's multifactorial, but there's hope. There's things that can be done, and I discuss this very extensively in my book.
So, Dr. Maroon, you've talked about your book, and I'd like to tell the audience about the book. This is Dr. Maroon's book, Square One. Excellent book. And you heard him mention his own story about how he went from being a neurosurgeon to working at a truck stop. He tells that story here, and he tells how he overcame that through this philosophy of Square One, which we're about to go into, but also the science behind it. So you can read in more detail about some of the science that Dr. Maroon is sharing with us today. So I thought you would want to know about this book, Square One. So, okay, Doctor, Square One, you you refer to the four sides of the square as your philosophy for overcoming stress. So let's go over the 4 sides.
Absolutely. Well, to go back just a bit, I was a very, very successful neurosurgeon at a university hospital. And then because of overwork, because of stress, I ended up living in a farmhouse in the middle of winter, working in a very dilapidated truck stop that my father bequeathed to my mother. And I had to help her manage the family finances. And so I'm wondering, what's a nice guy like this doing here? How did this happen to me? And I realized for the first time I had no insight into what I was doing that led me to this particular situation. And I picked up a little book by William Danforth, who formed the Purina Company back in the early 1900s, titled I Dare You. And I got this in high school as an award, but I really never read it. And basically he says, I dare you to lead a balanced life. That got my attention because I realized I was totally unbalanced. And he said, what I want you to do is to draw a square. On the top part of the square, put work. On this side of the square, put family, social. On the bottom side, spiritual. And on this side, physical. He said, now I want you to draw a square consistent with how much energy, time you put on each one of these sides. So I sat down and I drew my square, and it was an absolutely straight line with no family, no spiritual, and absolutely no physical. I was 20 pounds overweight. And it was a flat line EKG, signifying literally death. And it was all work.
Work.
It was all work.
Brain surgeon.
And, but I looked at that symbol and I said, it didn't quite register. I saw I'm really out of balance. And as luck, fortune, God would have it, I received a call from the banker who owned the mortgage on the truck stop. And he said, Joe, let's go for a run. I think you need to get out. Run, I can't walk. I got short of breath climbing a flight of steps. But I ended up going down to the Triadelphia, West Virginia high school track, and we made it around 4 times. I thought I would die. I said never again. But that night I went home, and it was the first night I slept in 4 months.
Now that's a key point. And let me just stop you there. Because
slept.
Stress makes it harder to sleep.
Oh my God.
And sleep is essential. So you've given us something very important. If we start exercising, even if we don't feel like it, and even if we're not doing that much, if it's more than we're accustomed to, we're going to encourage our bodies to sleep.
I tried sleeping pills. I tried melatonin. I tried natural, everything to try to sleep.
Right.
That was the first night I slept.
Key
So
point.
the next day, a light bulb went off, and I said, gee, maybe it's related. So I went down to the same track by myself, and I did 1.5 miles. Then 2 miles. Then 3 miles. And with each day, I felt my depression getting a little less, my ability to function. My brain was being rewired, literally.
Right.
And then about then, I also picked up a Bible that I had read very faithfully in high school and college. And I started getting back to the spiritual underpinnings that I really had lived by throughout my whole training and most of my medical career, but had slipped away. And then I kept up with I also reconnected with my kids and my family. So very slowly, each side was being reborn, if you would. And you mentioned I've done 5 Ironman triathlons in Kona, which is a real pinnacle of success. But I do that, and I started with a run around that high school track, and each day, each week, I increased the stress, not to the breaking point, but I got stronger and stronger and stronger. And I realized I need physical activity for my brain to function at the level I want to function at. It's a requirement. But at the same time, my diet improved. I started working with GNC, and my supplements, the supplements we discussed, entered into it. And so my diet, the physical activity, and I got rid of the toxins that were involved in terms of too much alcohol, too much anything, and then the prayer for the stress. So my square eventually was coming back into a square. And after a year, I was able to return to the most satisfying, gratifying part of my professional career. And that's been 20, 25 years ago. And I've been more productive, more content, more satisfied with what I'm doing than ever any time in my life. And now I'm in my 70s, and I must say I came in second in my age group in the Columbus Triathlon Ironman 3 weeks ago.
Yay!
I'm allowed to brag a little bit about that. But it's no secret. Chuck Noll, who was the head football coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers during the years they won all the Super Bowl, he said, football is not complicated. He said, it's about blocking and tackling. Life and stress control is really not complicated. It's about the 4 things that we mentioned. It's about exercise, controlling the work environment and having insight into it, avoiding environmental toxins, and controlling stress, and spirituality. If you do those 4 things, your life can get back into balance. And it's one step at a time. And it takes time, but it's possible.
Well, just you're telling your story, which is pretty darn riveting, to go from somebody who got out of breath climbing one flight of stairs to somebody who routinely just goes and enters the hardest triathlons. It's kind of a little lesson to all of us about the potential we may have within ourselves that we're not unleashing yet. If we put our minds to it, if we believe in ourselves enough to push ourselves a little bit more.
Peggy, that's so true. And the question as a neuroscientist myself, I asked, well, what is happening? How, in behavior, why do we behave we do? How do we get over things? What happens in the brain when we do these things? And there's a huge new field of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to form new connections and new fiber tracks through the brain. It used to be thought we were born with X number of brain cells, and we lost so many each day and each year until we shriveled up and died. We now know that it's a constant regenerative process in the brain, and it's a constant modulation of new synapses and fiber tracks So we're actually doing a study now looking at this in patients who have burnout and putting them into a program that involves the 4 factors that I mentioned, plus neurofeedback using very sophisticated electroencephalography, quantitative EEG. And we're going to measure their brain fiber tracts with very sophisticated imaging before and after these interventions to see if we can actually, for the first time, document reconnection, regeneration of these fiber tracts. I mean, it's, you know, I've done a lot of things. I've been very fortunate in neurosurgery, but I'm more excited about this and what we're talking about of regenerating nerve cells and reconnecting and neuroplasticity of regrowing our brain, so to speak.
We're talking about the potential for unlimited creativity for any person at any age, under any circumstances, if we do the right thing. And you're giving us the knowledge of what the right thing is. So I just want to review it. We're going to have 4 sides of the square. Our first side is we must rebuild our physical health, and we know we're going to exercise to promote brain health in a powerful way. We're going to eat in a healthy way. We're going to avoid the bad processed sugary foods and eat lots of healthy fats and good veggies and protein. We know we're going to eat better. We're not going to smoke. We're not going to overdrink, all that stuff. Okay, the next part of our square, you know, we haven't talked enough about the second part of the square. You mentioned, you know, you did not have, you were so work focused that your family relationships had been neglected. Let's talk about that side of the square, human relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I've given a whole lot of thought to that aspect of it. And a superb book by a psychologist, Csikszentmihalyi, entitled Flow, The Ultimate Psychological Experience. And what he said, the greatest moments of our lives occur when our mind or our body is stretched to its limits in the pursuit of something both difficult and worthwhile. I'm so blessed every day in my work with neurosurgery. I'm pushed to my limits frequently. And the reward, the flow experience that comes from doing that successfully is huge. Doing a triathlon is the same flow experience. You're exhausted at the end, but yes, I accomplished what I wanted. And I've given much thought to, and we discussed this, the 3 most important things in life. So, you know, what's it all? Why am I doing this? Why am I pushing myself? And it's for that flow experience, number 1. But if you think, what's really the 3 most important things in life? I'm going to ask your audience. Think about it. What are the 3 most important things in your life? Number 1 is health, a healthy mind and a healthy body. Without that, life is in shallows and misery, as Shakespeare said. The second is relationships with God, relationships with family, and relationships with friends. And I remember you shared with me your recent album. I think it's entitled Family and Friends, or Friends and Family.
Thank you for the plug. Yes, this actually, I never talk personally, but I will actually. This is my album, Friends and Family, all songs I wrote. And again, I don't usually talk personally, but this is such a personal talk. My husband had a stroke, and I am in charge of his caregiving responsibilities. And that stress was so overwhelming that I myself experienced burnout. And one way that I've come back is through music. When I write, I know exactly what you mean about flow, because when I write songs, I'm experiencing flow. And personally, for me, it's called Friends and Family. The title song is a tribute to my friends and family who get me through this terrible situation I'm in. And how could I get through it without these healthy relationships? I couldn't.
Well, I totally subscribe to that, and in my thinking, every day, God, family, and friends is a critical portion, and I'm very blessed to be able to share my experiences with patients in a spiritual way. But let me finish the third part.
Yes.
The third part is very simple. It's carpe diem. It's seize the day. To be able to sit here and talk to you like we are about things that are intimate to both of us, I'm blessed to be able to do this. And I'm seizing this moment to help others, hopefully, that might learn a little bit from our own personal stories. And when it gets back to the prayer aspect of it and stress, I operate 2 to 3 days a week and on complicated problems with patients who are oftentimes in a lot of pain from herniations of discs in their neck or their back or problems in the brain. There's no more stressful time for a person waiting to go into the operating room, wondering what's going to happen and what's the outcome going to be. So their cortisol level is sky high. And we know that reduces wound healing, prolongs hospital stay, and increases complications. That's the consequence of stress and anxiety at that point. And I've found, and I'm not converting anyone or proselytizing any specific religion, but I took care, and I describe this in the book, I took care of a priest who was the head of the Greek church in this country, and he started missionaries throughout the country and also was the head abbot in Mount Athos, which is a peninsula that juts out into the Aegean Sea in northern Greece and has been a home for monks for centuries. And he gave me this. And I'll inquire of my patients, first of all, do you believe in God? And I usually wear this in the operating room under my shirt.
Oh.
And if they evince any interest at all, I'll take their hand and I'll say a prayer. I say, can I say a prayer with you? And I say, today is the day the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. And with your help, let's get Peggy back to her health, her family, and her life. And I can only tell you, I can see the cortisol level, the epinephrine and adrenaline level, the calmness come to these patients who say a 30-second prayer before going into the operating room. And probably the most comments I get after surgery is, doctor, I just want to thank you for saying that prayer.
That's so powerful, just hearing you say that.
Yeah. We have the ability in our daily work to share in some way spirituality, prayer, something bigger than us. I mean, I don't, je ne sais pas. I don't know what it's all about. And I struggle to some extent, but I know there's something bigger than I and my Catholic upbringing. I was blessed to have a good foundation, and it's helped me through very many, many problems.
Well, as your talk gives us a deeper understanding of brain chemistry, we know, I really don't feel like exercising. Why do I have to exercise? Oh, I'm going to make BDNF in my brain. I better exercise. We might say we may not be used to prayer. It may feel awkward because we're living in a time where it isn't as common to pray or to be a member of the faith community as it was in our grandparents' time. So it may not come naturally to us, and we may be under a time of extreme stress, and it may feel awkward or embarrassing, but we could say to ourselves, if I pray, Dr. Maroon says my cortisol level is going to subside. So why don't I see if I can make my cortisol level subside by prayer? It's another way to come at it.
It's another way, and it also emphasizes the importance of meditation. Prayer is a form of meditation.
Yes.
And people who meditate, we've put them into PET scanners, and we see what areas of the brain light up and what happens. And there's a calmness that occurs with meditation, with prayer. And if you look at the areas of the world that have the most centenarians, the people who live over 100 the longest.
Right.
What are some of these places? Okinawa, Sardinia, the island of Icarus in the Aegean Sea, Nicoya in Costa Rica, and the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California. They have more people living over 100 than any place in the world. Why is that? The reason for that is they're using the epigenetic factors in the square we're talking about. They have a very healthy fish, olive oil diet, very low carbs and good healthy fats. They work hard, they're exercising. Their environment is very pure relatively in terms of air and water, and they have very strong family units. So what's the significance of the family unit and prayer and belief in living over 100? It reduces stress.
It reduces stress. That's our whole topic today.
So that's
our topic.
That's the thing. So again, is it complicated? It's not brain surgery.
You're allowed to say that. I want to go back to one aspect of relationships because I had the privilege of seeing the presentation you're about to make to Harvard Medical School, and you talk about marriage. Marriage for many people is the anchor relationship of their life, and you talk about studies of what builds up a marriage, what breaks down a marriage, what are the characteristics of how people interact with each other. So help us understand that.
Yeah, there's a psychologist, John Gottman, at the University of Washington, who took couples and put them in a controlled environment in which they filmed the couples, and they introduced various subjects, stressors into the situation to see how the couple reacted to different stressors and how they interacted. And he could predict up to 90% of the time which couples would subsequently end up divorced. And he enumerated several factors that are yellow lights that lead to red lights in a relationship. The first is criticism. Mm-hmm. If you find in a relationship that you're constantly criticizing or being criticized, you're in for big time trouble. Counterattack is another one. And you say something to me that I don't like, and I come right back at you and counterattack. And these kinds of interactions lead to stress. The stress leads to anxiety. The anxiety is a protective thing. We want to get out of anxiety. What do we do to relieve ourselves of anxiety? We drink. We may get in an inappropriate relationship. We don't come home. We do a whole lot of things to get rid of the anxiety in an unhealthy way. So I think we have to be, again, mindful. Like the Zen Buddhists say, you have to be mindful, you have to be aware, and you have to be in the moment. And this is very hard. It's easy to say, but it's hard to do unless your brain is telling you what you have to do. Be aware of it. There was a great book written in 1903 by a British writer and philosopher, James Allen. And the title of the book was As a Man Thinketh. And it's from the proverb 23, verse 7. As a man thinketh, so he or she shall be. So our thought processes control every situation in our lives, be it good or bad, in terms of the thoughts we have. You can't plant potatoes and get tomatoes.
No.
If you have bad thoughts,
right.
Bad thoughts, inappropriate thoughts, you're in an environment that's unhealthy in terms of your thinking. You're with a peer group that's doing things that you know shouldn't be done. You're going to have problems. If you make those choices to be the right choices, the moral choices, the good choices, mm-hmm. It's going to have just the opposite effect, and you're going to blossom and enjoy life to the fullest you can. So the important thing is that those choices not only are under our control. I mean, we make the choice. But genetically, we actually are turning our genes off for good or bad by how we think. We actually are affecting the neuroplasticity of our brain, the connections in our brain with our thoughts. You know, we glibly talk about the mind-body connection. Well, there's a huge connection between the mind and the body and what happens. We know heart attacks and all the other bad things that happen. But we also know a healthy mind in a healthy body is the most important thing in life.
You know, you're giving us new ways to think about things that we do. As we mentioned, the exercise, we're going to think it's good for our brain. Prayer, we're going to think good for our brain. A relationship, instead of, you know, maybe our husband, you know, got us a little irritated or annoyed, and instead of thinking, you know, I just want to tell him what I think about him. Why didn't he make the bed today? Whatever it was. Think, you know what, I'm going to avoid this because if I get into a fight, it's going to flood my brain with cortisol, and I don't need that stress right now. I don't need, my brain has enough cortisol.
You put it in much better words than I do. I get a little too technical at times, but you're right. You're exactly right.
It's just another way to understand, to help ourselves control ourselves and to make healthier choices. So we're almost done with our square. We've rebuilt our body. We've taken care of our physical health. We've improved and strengthened our relationships. We've started a spiritual relationship with our Creator to relieve stress and to make us feel more capable of taking on challenges. And the other one that we haven't talked about, funnily enough, is work, which is the only one that was on your diagram. What should our relationship with work be?
Again, various studies showed that 50% of the workforce in this country is fighting with stressful work environment. Commitments, schedules, demands, and it's being aware of that. And then sometimes we're caught in a bind. You know, we have to feed our family. We have to do what's necessary for our kids. So we don't have any other channels. But again, if you can, in the work environment, be vocal in an appropriate fashion about the kinds of things that are disturbing. In the medical profession, it's just horrible at the present time what physicians have to deal with in terms of the electronic medical record.
Yeah.
We spend more time putting data into a computer, not looking to the patient.
You got in there to help people, and you're dealing with
it's paperwork. So the
paperwork.
insurance companies can bill appropriately,
right?
And many other
stuff.
reasons.
Yeah.
And then with many health systems, physicians are on a time clock. You have to see so many patients per hour. If you're not filling your quota, there are penalties. So these kinds of daily stresses in the work environment, you know, it's hard to escape from that. That's why 50% of doctors have some symptom of burnout and feeling overwhelmed, overworked, underproducing. But being aware of it is number one. And then using the other adjuncts to modulate the stress is something that there's no perfect work environment.
No.
None. We all do things we don't want to do, but we know we have to do. But if we're aware of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and we have other outlets, music, I love it. I mean, music tunes your brain, literally. It tunes your brain, and it is a diversion. It brings your focus to something else that's important in your life and takes your mind off of your sore tooth. You know, if you have a toothache and you have a toothache and I have a toothache, we both have the same pain. But what we want to do is not focus on the pain of our toothache if we can, and take something, an anodyne, something to relieve the pain. Music for you, a bike ride or a swim for me. You know, everybody can find that in their life.
Okay, so I think we have our four sides of the square. I would like to keep talking with you all day, but I don't want to end without asking you about concussions and head injuries and so forth, because you have worked for many years with professional athletes. So what are the most important things for us to know?
Again, I have a perspective from the 1980s when I started working with concussion problems to the present time, and I've seen a huge evolution in care and recognition of the problem. Initially, when we began, it's how many fingers do you see, and a little ammonia chloride, smelling salts under the nose, and they went back into the game. Now, there's nothing farther from the truth in that, and we realize that the major problem with concussions is returning before the brain has had time to heal. Let me explain. If you get a splinter under your finger, what happens to your finger? It gets red, hot, tender, and swollen. That's the body's innate immune response to protect the body. If you get hit in the head, what happens to the brain? The cells in the brain called microglia, that you're familiar with, release the same chemicals that cause the red, hot, tender, and swollen in your finger. After a period of time, a week, 2 weeks or so, those chemicals dissipate and BDNF kicks in to reduce the inflammation and to heal the brain and repair the cells. If you get hit in that interval before the brain gets into the healing process, then it's like a brush fire in a dry forest. You can get cascading deterioration of function, including headaches and nausea and visual and vestibular problems, balance problems. So probably the most important thing is, number one, a single concussion by itself, in the great majority of cases, is not a permanent injury. Mm-hmm. I've had 7 concussions playing football at the University of Indiana. And it's, one crash with a pat bus or a motorcycle, yes, can do terrible damage. But the concussions that we see in sports are not in themselves life-changing or life-altering in the vast, vast majority of cases. The important thing is they be managed properly. We designed a test called IMPACT, which is a neurocognitive test. Now we've tested 13 million kids baseline with this test before they participate in contact sports. If there's a concussion or concussive episode, they're retested. They don't return to sports until they've come back to their baseline as one of the things necessary to return. So the knowledge, the awareness has been hugely beneficial. And I think still sports are the most important thing that kids can do. The lack of it is contributing to the obesity epidemic. General MacArthur said it best. He has a plaque at the West Point, where he was the commandant, that faces the playing fields, the baseball, the soccer, the football fields. And it says, "On the fields of friendly strife are sown the seeds that on other days and on other fields will lead to victory." Mm-hmm. On the fields of friendly strife, the stress, again, the stress that you learn, you don't quit, you get up when you fall, you move on, you have teamwork, there's loyalty. These are all qualities you get from sports, and in particular football. I wouldn't be sitting here today with you if I did not play youth football, because it completely changed my life in the environment that I was raised in. And so my take on it is, I encourage controlled sports by coaches who understand the problem and parents who get involved themselves. But I don't think there's anything better than a young boy or a young girl can do. We talk about concussions in football. Girls' soccer has a higher, or at least as high of incidence of concussions as male football. But it's very little talked about soccer.
That's true.
But we need to protect the brains of all these kids, and that's what we're all about.
So what you're saying is you sometimes see permanent injury if people return to play too soon. There's just as in exercise, naturally, there's a natural healing process that happens to our brain through exercise. There's a natural process that happens when a brain is injured through rest. Is that correct?
To rest. And now we used to put people in complete bed rest, complete rest, cocoon them, so to speak, after
Right.
concussion.
No.
We now know that's not the right approach. We encourage exercise as long as it doesn't reproduce the symptoms for the same reason we've talked about in terms of regenerating the growth factors in the brain.
The healthy stress, but not over into
Exactly.
the cortisol-producing
Exactly.
stress. Okay,
Exactly.
so I think that gives us a good basic understanding of current knowledge of dealing with concussions. So thank you for that. Thank you for everything. We've learned so much. It's such a rich conversation. There's so much to absorb here. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. I enjoy sharing this because I get letters like you do. This has made a big difference to me. And Sanjay Gupta, one of the endorsers of the book, basically said the same thing. He said, he's gotten something from this as knowledgeable as he is. So I love sharing it, and I appreciate the opportunity, Peggy.
Thank you so much for watching, and maybe you'll have a chance to read Dr. Maroon's book, Square One, and learn more from his wisdom about how to keep your life in balance every day, how to keep your brain healthy. Thank you for watching. Hi, I'm Peggy Sarlin, and I love talking with Dr. Maroon. I thought he was fascinating. And tomorrow's interview is fascinating too, but in a totally different way. I talked to Dr. Norman Doidge, who's with the University of Toronto and Columbia University. He's the best-selling author of The Brain's Way of Healing and The Brain That Changes Itself. And these books have helped millions of people around the world understand the concept of neuroplasticity. Now, that's a property of the brain that allows it to actually change its physical structure in response to outside stimuli, such as sound and light. And for example, many children with autism are unable to process sound the way that you and I do. And researchers have been able to use music to retrain the brains of these children so they become able to process sound normally. Now, this whole concept of neuroplasticity offers an exciting new way to alter the brain physically and to heal it without drugs, without surgery. It's getting attention as a whole new approach to regaining lost brain function, whether it's ADD or memory loss or the loss of movement following a stroke. You can change the brain to do what you want or need it to do, and that's what it comes down to. Research has shown that just shining certain kinds of light on certain parts of the body can bring back vision. Stimulating certain parts of the tongue with mild electric current, that sounds weird, I know, can reshape the brainstem and can bring back lost functions. The brain responds to these stimuli and it physically changes. Dr. Doidge describes how a stroke victim who lost most of his vision got it back when the physician shone a certain type of light on the back of his neck. And this light treatment is also highly effective for pain. So by taking advantage of the new findings about neuroplasticity, stroke victims have been able to regain function, hands, arms, legs, feet. And what does that mean for somebody with dementia or just senior moments? Well, it means that brain games do work, but not all of them, only certain ones. And Dr. Doidge explains just what those are. Yes, crossword puzzles, that kind of thing can sharpen your brain a little bit. But if you really want to take it up a notch, watch this interview. Get the latest findings on neuroplasticity. The interview goes up at 9 a.m. Eastern. You can view it for 24 hours. So check your emails in the morning for the link. I'll see you then.
Please consider supporting our important mission by choosing to own a copy of Regain Your Brain for yourself. You'll receive all the valuable therapies in the interviews and many more additional gifts and benefits. Your purchase will help us continue to bring this vital, important information to more people. Just click on one of the banners below and join us in our mission.